We're going to have a look at a sample paragraph and see how it looks, what kind of pattern it ends up having as far as known, new, and old information. So when I'm doing this, the first thing that I like to do is make myself a key. That way I can remember which color I assign to which types of information. So at the top you can see I've typed known, new, and old, and I'm going to go ahead and assign each of them a highlighted color. So we'll use yellow for known. And I like pink, so I'm going to use pink for new, and then you can see another color that's green for old information. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we'll start with yellow, and I'm going to come down to my paragraph, and I can expect the known in a good paragraph anyway, as we know from looking at the doing laundry paragraph. If you don't reveal your known, or if you delay your known too long, then your reader will feel lost and not know what the paragraph is about, and you've already sort of had a breakdown in communication. So we expect the known to be as early as possible in the paragraph. And you can see here, coastal erosion is a problem throughout the United States. Our known is coastal erosion, right here, the very first piece of information. Now, of course, we've just started scaffolding, and here we now have a basis of information that we can share with the reader, and the reader knows that the entire paragraph can be expected to be about coastal erosion and things related to coastal erosion. So now that we have that shared foundation, we can start building the rest of the paragraph. So I expect the next piece of information to be new, which it is a problem throughout the United States. I did not know that prior to coastal erosion about coastal erosion because there is nothing prior to it in this paragraph. And so I'm going to go to my pink color now. And I mean, this isn't an exact science. Whether you highlight your helping verb in the articles here doesn't really matter. I like to focus just on the really meaning carrying units, so I'm just going to leave a few words off. But if it makes you feel better to have everything highlighted, then you can stick it in a category. That's fine. The point isn't so much highlighting every word as it is looking for a pattern, a color pattern in the end, which we'll see at the end of this paragraph. So then we're going to look at the next piece of information. Usually the first two are the easiest because they tend to be known and new. So now we have to sort of think a little bit more critically. And it occurs on the East Coast and West Coast. And so first we want to find our subject, which is it. It is a pronoun, and it's referring to the known coastal erosion. Now, since it's only the known the first time that we see it, then that means that it is now, if you can kind of guess, old information. So I'm going to give it a green. And then the fact that it occurs on the East and West Coast, well, we did not know that. We knew that it occurred throughout the United States, but they're giving us something more specific here, and so that is a new piece of information. Okay? And then the next sentence starts with coastal erosion, and coastal erosion is our known, but since we only count it as the known when it's being established as shared information, it's being repeated now, which means that it is old information. And then they give us some more. Will directly influence the environment and society, and that is new information about coastal erosion. We did not know that before. Okay. And then it says in the coastal area. Now, this is an interesting piece of information here. And some of you might be tempted right away to say, well, that's new information. They haven't said coastal area before. But if, in fact, when they say coastal area, they're talking about the East Coast and the West Coast throughout the United States. And so I am actually going to count this as old information. Now, don't get too caught up in categorizing a prepositional phrase like this because that it may or may not really affect your pattern. You again want to look at the overall pattern that you see at the end and try not to get too hung up on the exact science of this because it's a little bit inexact. Okay, And then you can see in the next sentence, cities and villages is our subject. We have talked about coastal area, we have talked about East Coast and West Coast, but now we're starting to talk about people and the people that live there, and we haven't done that before. So when you think back about denotation and connotation, and you look at something like coastal area, that's going to share pretty similar denotations and a neutral connotation to East Coast and West Coast. But when you think about cities and villages, that denotation does include people in that equation, which area does not. And so I'm going to count that as new, a new piece of information. That are located in the coastal areas, that is old information. Because we've already talked about these coastal areas. So you can see they're establishing the location of cities and villages by stacking the new and old information. And the fact that they will experience changes in the shape of the shoreline is new. We knew already that they were going to influence environment and society. We did not know how, and here you can see the fact that they're going to experience changes in the shape of the shoreline is an environmental influence. And so that is a new piece of information. When shorelines have changes in shapes, and that is old information, because you can see here we've already talked about the shape of the shoreline. So you can start to really see how information is being built, how it's being scaffolded in this paragraph in order to maintain this common ground with the receiver. You know, whenever you are learning something, you always are building information on information that you already understand to be true. And then the next piece, fishing in tide pools and from boats. We have not talked about fishing, and you can see, you'll notice they introduced this with coastal erosion, the known. Then they got more specific, talking about how it's going to affect environment and society. And that's exactly what they are doing. Here we've heard about the environmental effect, and now with fishing, you think about employment, jobs, and people. We're going to start talking about society. And so that's a new piece of information. Okay, and the fact that the fishing in tide pools and from boats will also need to become different. We have not mentioned that before. We have said there's going to be an influence. We haven't said what that is, and so I'm going to highlight that also as new information. Okay, so the local people, and again, this kind of comes back to coastal area relating to East Coast and West Coast, and local people relating to cities and villages. So you could argue that, well, they haven't specifically talked about people, but I'm going to say cities and villages, the local people that live there is a direct reference to the people of the cities and villages. So I'm going to highlight that as old information because I feel like the writer has already established who those local people are. The local is the city and villages that they've already mentioned here, who make their living by fishing. And so we have not mentioned that that's how they make their living, but we have talked about fishing already and the fact that there's going to be fishing going on. So we're just connecting here. The writer is making a connection directly between the cities and villages and the fishing. So I'm going to highlight fishing as old information, but I'm going to highlight this piece here as new. And then the fact that they have to adjust their traditional ways. Again, adjustment relating to change, and we already know that they need to become different. Okay, so I'm going to mark adjust as old information, but I did not know that these were sort of traditional ways of doing their jobs every day. And so I'm going to mark that last piece, the fact that they've connected tradition in there as new information. Okay. And honestly, this last sentence is a little bit of a mix. Whatever pink and green make, if there's any artists listening, because there is a real connectivity in this very last sentence between change, which is one of the themes that rolls through this paragraph, people, and the effect of the coastal erosion on environment and society. And that should be the way that it is in a good concluding sentence. It should really bring in all of the different pieces of the paragraph into something that is coherent and that does close the topic. So what I want to look at now, and what you will see, is this very pretty pattern that we've made. We could print it and hang it on our refrigerator. You've got your known information here that the paragraph is going to be about, and you can see this is a pretty coherent paragraph. It's very well built. Every time the writer is giving me a new piece of information, they use an old piece of information to scaffold it. So you can see our pattern is going to go pink, green, pink, green, pink, green, pink, green, and pretty much through the entire paragraph we get a really nice alternating pattern. Again, as I said, it's not always perfect like this, but it gives you a pretty good idea of what to expect.